Hey, welcome back. This is a follow-up video to an older video I did on Loonatics Unleashed. So if you haven't seen that, then I'll leave a card up in the corner as well as a link in the description for you to check it out. With that in mind, I'm just going to go forward assuming that you've seen the older video. And with the older video in mind, I want to correct a major, well, not a major mistake I made in the first video, but definitely a major error I made. I mentioned Zadavia's homeworld. It was called Planet Freeling, and I couldn't remember the name, but I only realized after, like literally the day after I uploaded that video, I was watching another video, and someone mentioned Fritz Freeling, and I realized, oh, Planet Freeling is a reference to Fritz Freeling, and I felt so dumb after I heard Fritz Freeling's name, because like he's one of the guys who he's not mentioned as often as someone like Chuck Jones, but he is a very big player in terms of classic Looney Tunes behind the scenes people, and I felt bad for missing that reference. But with that in mind, here I am. I've finished watching Loonatics Unleashed season 2 finally, and unlike season 1 where I sort of just finished season 1 and jumped right into the video, I've given season 2 quite a bit of time to sort of ruminate and digest, and it's interesting because I think I'm going to have to come to terms with the fact that this show has really become sort of my trashy, guilty pleasure show, because I don't think season 2 is better than season 1, but by the time I finished it, I would be lying if I didn't say that I was kind of sad that my time with the show was over. I had watched all the episodes, and it was like, oh, no more Loonatics Unleashed to watch. And it's not even that it's like a great show or anything, but I kind of had grown to like the show over the course of its 26 episodes. And again, it has its problems. I definitely went over a lot of the problems in season 1. This is interesting because there's definitely a noticeable course correction in this, and there's a lot more focus on comedy, and they integrated a lot more classic Looney Tunes characters. So in season 1 was very much a straightforward action show of the time, a very straightforward action superhero show, villain of the week style, where they would introduce a villain with some gimmick or something, and the Lunatics would fight said villain, and that would be the episode. There wasn't really much more to it than that. This time around, they're very clearly trying to move in a different direction. They've added more comedy elements, so even if there's a villain, that won't necessarily be the sole focus of the episode is fighting that villain. Sometimes they do try to shake it up a bit. And they've also integrated a lot more classical Looney Tunes characters, or their interpretations of Looney Tunes characters. For instance, in the very first episode, there's a new villain introduced along with Yosemite Sam. And then there's another episode with Pepe Le Pew, although for some reason they made him a human. I have no idea why they did this. For some reason they made both Foghorn Leghorn and Pepe Le Pew a human. I didn't mention Foghorn Leghorn last episode, but I just don't know why they did this. I don't know why they changed these animal characters to human characters, especially when there are tons of animal characters already in the show. It's very bizarre. I don't know why they did it. But they also got Gossamer, they got, Marvin the Martian, and so they're really trying to make it more Looney Tunes-esque. And it's odd, really, because they clearly, like season 1, they were very sticking with their own guns, original stuff with, our main cast of characters being really the only Looney Tunes to be seen. Here, it's a very odd blend, because I was wondering, like, okay, are they trying to do a Looney Tunes show, or are they trying to do an action show of their own sort of style? It was very, I guess it lacked I don't want to say it lacked the confidence, but it lost a little bit of the clarity of direction, which I don't want to say it had super clear direction to begin with, but it's definitely a shift. I don't know what the other way to describe it, really. It's just a shift in tone, and it's like it sometimes it works for the better, other times it works for the worse. It's up and down depending on the episode. Like the first episode of this season really wasn't grabbing me, but to my surprise, there was a lot of interesting stuff this season. For example, they kind of, one of my major critiques of last season was that there wasn't a lot of character-based stuff, and due to the more comedic shift in tone, to my surprise, they actually do some more character-based storylines where you can tell that it's not just plot-driven. It's not just, we need to save the city from villain of the week and that's it. There is a bit more character going on here than there was in season 1. So in that respect, I do need to acknowledge that they basically addressed a major complaint I had with the first season. One example, I mean, this isn't to say it's perfect, though. They definitely don't do it as well as they could. For example, I think a good example of like an area where clearly they improved in terms of character-based stories, but at the same time fumbled the ball, is in the episode with Porky Pig, or, well, their version of Porky Pig, Pinky, as they call him. Basically, this was a really interesting episode, actually, because we find out that Duck, Danger Duck, used to be an orphan, and he and Porky Pig were the last two orphans at the orphanage, and Duck flipped a coin in order to choose which one of them would get picked, but it was his secret double-sided coin, his heads coin, which is heads on both sides. So he tricked Porky into being the one to get chosen, and because Danger Duck was the one to get adopted, and he tricked Porky in that underhanded way, he grew up to be a really, like, a hero of the city. Meanwhile, Porky Pig was adopted by two criminals, and he turned into a criminal. And there was a moment where I was like, oh my goodness, this is actually a really interesting character moment, because at the end of the episode, like when Porky Pig is revealed to be the villain, which, by the way, a very odd choice to have Porky Pig be the villain, although I guess it was a plot twist no one saw coming. At the end, when Porky Pig is revealed to be the villain, Duck says to himself, oh my god, if I hadn't tricked you back then, if I hadn't done that underhanded thing, then I would have turned out exactly like you. I would have turned out to be a criminal. And then, right after we get this really interesting potential for like this character moment for Duck, the show immediately undercuts it with Porky basically saying, nope, it was always planned to be this way. I was always going to be with this guys. I was always evil. It wasn't the way I was raised or anything like that. I was always evil no matter what. So it was like so close. It was so close to being just this really interesting character moment that they could have built on and expanded upon, and they just like threw it away. The instant they had something interesting for Duck's character, they threw it away, and it was so disappointing. So that's the sort of example of like a character-based story. Like this was based in, like that episode was based in character-based decisions, because the whole reason Porky was with them in the first place was because Duck felt bad for him. And so it was like they're playing with these more character-based concepts that aren't just purely plot, but at the same time they aren't really utilizing them properly. And another really interesting episode I felt, and this is really the standout episode, not just of the season but of the series, is The Family Business. And this episode, I have gotten this is so embarrassing to admit, I have gotten like I've submerged myself into the Loonatics Unleashed fandom, and I think that this episode is like a very important keystone episode for the series and for the fans. This is a very important episode, mainly because it introduces Rev Runner's family, who this is the only episode we see them in, and it introduces both of Rev's parents, and as well as Rev's brother, Rip Runner, who is a edgy teenager. And this is a big episode, number one, because in the fandom of Loonatics Unleashed, yes, there's a Loonatics Unleashed fandom, Rip Runner is basically a fan favorite character. I think it's fair to say he's a fan favorite in sort of like in terms of the side characters. And also, more importantly, we learn that Rev Runner's parents have a prejudice against coyotes. And this is a really interesting decision from a writing and character standpoint because it adds a bit of, number one, it adds tension in the story because, Rev and Tech are best friends. They're best friends on the team, and they also they work together, and they work together throughout this episode. And it adds like a bit of complexity to their relationship and a bit of backstory to how Rev was raised, and it helps humanize these characters all the more. And I really think this is like a keystone episode in terms of its importance to Loonatics Unleashed fans, just because it's the sort of this right here. Not only do they add these elements, but this right here is a character-based story. Everything which happens within this episode is caused because of the characters' decisions. It's not just villain shows up and lunatics have to stop them, which was basically almost every season 1 episode. This episode here, it is designed around the way the characters feel and their emotions and the conflicts between them. And it's the example of the sort of episode which I wanted in season 1. I wanted a bit more integration of the character motivations and character-based storylines into the plot. I wasn't asking for anything deep or crazy, but this is basically an example of what I thought would have improved season 1. And I'm not gonna go. I know I'm praising the show right now. I have my problems with the show, but this episode, I think it's a standout amongst the fandom for the key reason of it has that character-based story to it. Basically, what happens is the whole storyline revolves around Rev wanting to impress his parents, and that's where all the conflict comes in. Because he's trying to impress his parents, and then Rip gets jealous because his father is playing favorites and is like giving and treating Rev much better than him, and then that's where the conflict comes in with like him stealing the bug thingy, whatever it is. And I'm not doing a good job explaining this storyline, but basically what you need to know is that it's very character driven, and that's, I think, a massive improvement in terms of what sort of stories they're telling. Now, this isn't like some grand masterpiece or anything. There are plenty of episodes in season 2 which are kind of dull or duds, but this episode in particular, I think it does stand out. Another episode which isn't quite as good, but again, it's just another episode where it showed us a side of these characters in this world that we just didn't get in season 1. I cannot remember the name of the episode. It's basically this episode where there's this guy in jail and he threatens to get out and kill Danger Duck. And what's really interesting about this episode is that we do get a little bit of interaction between the lunatics and the press and paparazzi. We get very little interaction between the lunatics and the citizens of Acmetropolis, which is the city they're protecting. And I think I would have loved to see, like, we have no idea what the public's opinion is on them. We don't know if, like, they interact with the public so little. We don't know what the general consensus is on them. Like, we know they got a reward like a year after the meteor fell, but we really don't know much. And so what's so interesting about this episode is that Duck saves the day. He defeats a villain, and he hogs all the credit for it, and the press begin, interviewing him, and it really highlights this side of Duck's personality where he likes the attention and he likes the glory. And we just don't get to see a lot of how the press view them. And it's interesting because we get a small glimpse of, like, the press interviewing Duck in their headquarters and stuff. And we never really see stuff like that, like the aftermath of what it's like after they defeat a villain and stuff like that. It's just another side, or a glimpse into another side that I could have used in season 1. This stuff which, it's not just action, it's not just saving the day. There's more to life than, there's more to life, there's more to these characters, there's more to this world, and we get these little glimpses throughout season 1 that I really wanted more of. And I think if they focused in more on the character stuff, like I said last season, if they focused more on the character stuff, I think this would have been better. But I don't want to complain, because they did a lot more character stuff this season than they did in the first season, and I do appreciate that. Now, in terms of, again, this is all within the context of, if you want a Looney Tunes show, then this show is not for you. This show is not even attempting to be a Looney Tunes show. It's definitely, well, it is attempting to be. It's trying to retrofit itself to be more like Looney Tunes, while at the same time trying to be an action cartoon, which is why they clearly added a lot more classical Looney Tunes characters in this season, and a lot more comedy, but at the same time, it's nothing like a Looney Tunes show. And so if you want that Looney Tunes style, you're definitely not going to get it here. And there's also the weird factor of when they introduce all of these older Looney Tunes, unlike the Loonatics, which are totally redesigned and stylized in their own way, separate from how the classical Looney Tunes were stylized, with these classical Looney Tunes, they make much more of an effort to make them recognizable in the Looney Tunes as Looney Tunes characters. And so it's very odd, because you have the Loonatics, who are in their own lunatic style, and then you have the classical Looney Tunes, who feel either slightly modified or retrofitted to be in the lunatic style, as opposed to being completely redesigned in the same way the Loonatics were to fit in that world. And they do still do redesigns and things, but it feels like they feel a lot more cartoony they feel way more cartoony than the rest of the world that they're in. Like, you have, Yosemite Sam and Elmer Fudd, and they're these, like, cartoon characters in this world which has these character designs which are fairly, the human characters are very often fairly realistic. If you look at Zadavia and a lot of the citizens, they have these sort of more realistic designs. And, like, Elmer Fudd's this really short guy. Like, they didn't really change much to integrate him into the lunatic style. And so, once again, my complaint from last season carries over, where they have these clashing styles all over the place. It's not as glaring as I want to make it out to be, but definitely it is something that I thought they could have improved on. So with all that in mind, I think that was maybe all I had. Well, it's not all I had to say. I mean, who knows? I could do a follow-up video, but that's my ramble, my thoughts on season 2 of Loonatics Unleashed. There's more I could say, but I guess I don't know quite how to phrase it. Certain things, like they took Granny and made her into a villain. And this season has a weird thing for taking classic Looney Tunes and turning them into villains for some reason. The series finale is, I can't decide whether or not I like it better or worse than last season's finale. It's the sort of season finale where it's like, you can tell they wanted to have a third season, but they were obviously canceled, so it kind of works as a finale to the series, but you can tell it wasn't meant to really wrap things up fully. They bring back the villain from last season, Optimatus, and he has a very rushed redemption arc. But yeah, the finale actually felt pretty big in scope, pretty grand. So in terms of a finale for this show, I guess it did pretty good. But yeah, that's what I had to say on season 2 of Loonatics Unleashed. It was an interesting show, to be certain. It definitely was an interesting show. I don't know what other way to say it. It was, I do not regret watching Loonatics Unleashed. I know this show is despised. As I said in my first review, it's difficult to get angry at a show from 15 years ago, and it really wasn't that bad. It had a lot of problems, but I could imagine, a kid of the times enjoying it. I think it's perfectly serviceable in that regard, and they had a lot of interesting ideas that they could have capitalized on, but they really didn't. I think, if you gave this show to a team of writers and gave it a proper reboot, then I think it could actually be pretty good, because they had a lot of, like, whenever they delved just a little bit into the characters, it was like it really helped to get me a bit more invested. And I think, I don't want to say it's underrated, but, well, I guess technically it is underrated just from how intensely despised it is. But it definitely isn't as bad as some people make it out to be. But I can understand if you're a Looney Tunes fan going into this, because this show would not fulfill a desire for a new Looney Tunes show at all. It is its own thing. Even when it's trying to be closer to Looney Tunes, it's still its own thing. But yeah, as an action cartoon of the 2000s, it is, amongst the action cartoons of the 2000s. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Loonatics Unleashed Season 2. Did I enjoy it? Did I enjoy the show? Yes, because it's my trash guilty pleasure show at this point. So yeah, let me know what you thought of Loonatics Unleashed, as well as Loonatics Unleashed Season 2 down in the comments below. Feel free to leave a like or a dislike, and feel free to subscribe, because I'm going to do more videos giving my thoughts on the various things, from other animated shows to movies and whatnot. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you stick around, but if not, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a lovely day.